Hello, my name is Dr. David Price, and I am taking the time to do a study on the various Sabbaths. So many of us are practicing the Sabbath from Friday night to Saturday night, and I see that through Scripture as inaccurate. So what I am attempting to do is show through Scripture, not a lot of similes, not a lot of metaphors, but speaking what thus saith Yahuwah. A Sabbath day's rest. So the first thing I want to look at is the seventh day Sabbath. I have compiled a booklet. So if you would like to have the complete booklet in written form, if you would email me, newgenesis5111@gmail.com, I will gladly send it to you. The seventh day Sabbath. We're going to look at Leviticus chapter 23, verse 3. 6 days shall work be done, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of rest. It is an holy convocation. You shall do no work therein. It is the Sabbath of Yahuwah in all your dwellings. Exodus chapter 35, verse 3. You shall kindle no fire throughout your habitations upon the Sabbath day. So there's no cooking. And remember, day is singular, meaning the seventh day. Cooking is prohibited on this seventh day Sabbath. This is what we're particularly looking at right now, the seventh day Sabbath. Not cooking is distinguished by other Sabbaths, which lets us know that the seventh day Sabbath is one Sabbath. Then we have various other types of Sabbath. Exodus chapter 16, verse 12 and 13. I, Yahuwah, speaking, have heard the murmurings of the children of Israel. Speak unto them, saying, at evening. Now, the evening here is the word areb, which is the Hebrew in the Strong's Concordance H6153, areb. Now, the word areb means dusk or right before it gets dark. So, read it again. I have heard the murmurings of the children of Israel. Speak unto them, saying, at evening, right before it gets dark, this is at dusk, you shall eat flesh. And in the morning you shall be filled with bread. And ye shall know that I am Yahuwah your Elohim. And it came to pass at evening, this is areb, at dusk, the quails came up and covered the camp. And in the morning, this is the word morning is H, this is the Hebrew, and the Strong's Concordant, H1242, which is Boker. And this is the dawn, or the beginning, right before the daylight shows. He says, and the quails came up and covered the camp in the morning, that's H1242, and dew laid round about the host. Exodus 16:19, and Moses said, let no man leave of it until morning. This is the early part of the morning, H1242. Notwithstanding, they hearkened not unto Moses, but some of them left it until morning. This is the early morning, right before the sun is about to shine. And it bred worms and stank, and Moses was wroth with them. Exodus 16:21, and they gathered it every morning, every man according to his eating. And when the sun waxed hot, it melted. Verse 22, and it came to pass that on the sixth day, they gathered twice as much bread, because they can't do so on the seventh day. They did 2 omers for one man, and all the rulers of the congregation came and told Moses. In Exodus 16:23, tomorrow, remember I'm telling you this for a reason, tomorrow, this is one day singular, is the rest. This is the Shabbaton. This is the Hebrew 7677, which derives from the word 7676, which is the Shabbat. So let me read it again. Today is the rest of the Shabbaton, of the set apart. This is the Kadash, a sacred place, a thing dedicated or sanctified. So it's the set apart unto. Now this is a prepositional phrase. Unto Yahuwah. Let's read it again after we broke that down. Tomorrow is the rest of the set apart unto Yahuwah. This Sabbath is our special and dedicated time with or for Yahuwah. Now, this is a very important time because this is considered a moedim. This is an appointment. An appointed time means an appointment. So we don't want to come to the appointment at the wrong time. It doesn't matter what we have. If we have a set appointment, we have to follow the time of the appointment. So this is very important. Now, unto Yahuwah. This unto is a preposition. Now, prepositions give location, they give time, and or direction. Now, unto here is given direction as to whom the special dedicated rest day is for. Yahuwah said bake. Now, the word bake here means to cook, especially to bake bread. He said to bake and sieve that which you will sieve. The word sieve here is to bake or to boil or roast. So he's saying bake your bread and cook your meat. And that which remaineth over lay up for you to be kept until the morning. 1, 2, 4, 2. Now the morning is the early part, right before the darkness and the light gives way. The darkness gives way to the light. This is the twilight. This is the dawn. He says, and that which remaineth over lay up for you to be kept until the morning. 1, 2, 4, 2. You can cook all night, but Exodus 35:3 prohibits cooking on the Sabbath. So if we're to cook and do the preparation at night, the Sabbath begins in the morning of the 7th day. Now in the morning, the boker, the dawn, or right before the sun shines, begins the period to cease cooking. You cease work. You are to begin the Shabbaton, or the special dedicated time period unto the Most High Yahuwah. And it is to be done on the 7th day. That's one singular day. This is a numerical designation to specify which day and how many days the 7th day Sabbath is to be observed. It is one day. Exodus 16, verse 24, and they laid it up till morning as Moses bade, and it did not stink. Once again, in both texts, the morning was the turning point and established the beginning of the 7th day. The 6th day, the 6th night, at Areb, at nightfall is when the quail came. They cooked the food all the way through the night, and they can't leave it because the morning begins the 7th day. Exodus 16:25, and Moses said, eat that day in the morning, for today, again, in the morning, is a Sabbath unto, this gives the direction to who is for, Yahuwah. This Sabbath, or this special appointment, is for or to Yahuwah. Today, in the morning, you shall not find it in the field. That was Exodus 16:25. 16:26 says 6 days you shall gather it, but on the 7th day, beginning in the morning. Exodus 16:23d, which is the Sabbath, which is the Sabbath, in it there shall be none. You're not going to find it in the Sabbath. So it's telling us when the Sabbath take place, the quail come at night. You can cook throughout the night, but then in the morning, in the morning is the Hebrew 1242, which is Boker. That is the early morning in between the night and the morning. That is when the next morning takes place and the Sabbath begins. That is when the 7th day begins. But we're going to continue to prove this. Now, the 7th day is it the morning or the evening? We'll continue. Let's get back to the beginnings. Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, Elohim created the heaven and the earth. Verse 2. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. Now, some see this as an indication that night comes first, then day, and then back to night. However, Yahuwah will make it crystal clear if you just open your ears, forget what you were taught, and just listen to what the scripture says. He's going to make it very clear what is the first or beginning point of a day. Verse number 3. And the spirit of Elohim moved upon the face of the waters, and Elohim said, let there be light. Now the word for light here is H216, which is or. It means a luminary, the sun. So he said, and the spirit of Elohim moved upon the face of the waters, and Elohim said, let there be light, and there was light. There was the luminary. Verse 4 of Genesis chapter 1. And Elohim saw that it was good, and Elohim divided the light from the darkness. Now, the darkness here is the Hebrew word H28:22, which is kashet, which means darkness or light. This is distinguished from hareb, which means the night going in from the day, going into the night, going to the dusk. This here is darkness, and this is equated to night. So he's showing us day, and he's showing us night. In verse number 5 of chapter 1 of Genesis, and Elohim called or named the light, that luminary, day, yom. Day as the warm hours can mean sunrise to sunset, but I want to show you something. I'm going to demonstrate as we continue how even in the Hebrew Strong's Concordance dictionary, it is misunderstood and inaccurately stated that a day can also mean from sunset to the next sunset. This is not a day, nor could it ever be a day, and I'll be able to prove that. We'll continue. And the darkness, this is Kashah, the darkness of the night, he called night. So Elohim saw that it was good, and he divided the light from the darkness. And Elohim called the light day, and the darkness he called night. He just named them. Now, here is where it's imperative that you listen very carefully. And the evening, this is Horeb, 6153. This is the evening or the dusk. And the morning, this is the early part of the morning, H1242. This is the dawn. So from the dusk, when it's starting to get dark, until the dawn, when it's starting to get light, this, he said, from the evening and the morning were the first day. This is the very first day. He signified it. So now we're going to try to understand, is it what we've been taught, what we've been lied to, the deception that the enemy has given us, that the evening begins the day? Now ask yourself this question. Is Arab, that's the dusk, or right before it gets dark, let's say 6:30 p.m. until 6:30 a.m., is that a day? Just stop and think for a second. 6:30 p.m. to 6:30 a.m., is that a day? The answer is no. The evening and the morning is the conclusion of the first day. He makes it very clear. Genesis 1:5. Yahuwah called, here's the order. Yahuwah called the day, number 1. The darkness he called night, number 2. And the evening, that's the dusk, and the morning, right before sunlight, were the first day. What is the order? It is day number 1. Day is number 1. Night is number 2. When night concludes, this brings on another day. Did you understand that? Let's read it again. Genesis 1:5. Yahuwah called the day, that's number 1. And the darkness he called night, that's number 2. And the evening, that's the dusk, right when it gets dark. And the morning, that's right before sunlight, that doesn't go into the next day, were the first day. Genesis once again, 1 and 5 once again. And Elohim called the light. Now, that's a 12-hour period, approximately 12-hour period. Yahusha answered in John chapter 11, verse 9. Are there not 12 hours in a day? And the darkness he called night. This is also approximately 12 hours. And conclusion of the evening, the Arab, the dusk, or the beginning of night, going into the early morning, constitutes a 24-hour day. Day, 12 hours. Evening, 12 hours. Evening concludes, that's 24 hours. Then we go into the next day. Did you get it? Did you get it? Okay. If it was from darkness to daytime to nighttime, that would be a 36-hour period. There's some that believe that it was evening and then morning and then evening. That makes a 36-hour day. If evening until morning, that will constitute a 12-hour day. And we'll see in subsequent scriptures that this is not a possibility. Number 1, day was established. Day, then night, and once a little light shone, it is a new day. A day never completed a day if it is a 12-hour period. From approximately 6:30 p.m. to 6:30 a.m., that will always be night. Let me say that again. I'm using these time periods to set some type of image. From 6:30 p.m. to 6:30 a.m. will never, ever be a day. That is called a night. A complete day and night constitutes a 24-hour period. Here we go. The day is the ruler of the night. Let's see Genesis 1:16. And Elohim made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. Now, as a ruler of the day, that's the Yom 3:117, the ruler of the day, and a night equates to 1 day. Please stay with me. As I've already stated, I will prove this to be a fact utilizing subsequent scriptures. Now, there are, however, occasions when a Shabbat begins in the evening, but This is not, and I repeat, this is not the seventh day Shabbat, but is one of several types of Shabbats. So what we'll see is there is a times when it starts in the evening, but this is a different Shabbat, and I'll be able to prove that using scripture only. In Nehemiah chapter 13, verse 19, there's much discussion concerning the gates of Jerusalem being closed in the evening. Therefore, the Shabbat is taking place in the evening. Now, let us examine contextually what was taking place. The construction of the walls was completed, and in Nehemiah 12, 27 to 43, the dedication of the rebuilding of the wall ceremony is taking place. In Nehemiah 13, 15, in those days saw I in Judah some treading wine presses on the Sabbath. That's the first violation. And bringing in sheaves. That's the second violation. And laden asses, 3 violation. And also wine, 4 violation. And grapes, 5 violation. And figs, 6. And all manner of burdens, carrying things. That's the 7th violation, which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. The day, not evening. Whenever evening is mentioned, whenever evening is spoken of, it is very specific when Yahuwah gives his instructions that he will say at evening. When evening is referred to here, Nehemiah 13, 16. There dwelt men of Tyre also therein, which brought fish and all manner of wares and sold on the Sabbath unto the children of Judah and in Jerusalem. Nehemiah 13, 7. Then I contended with the nobles of Judah and said unto them, this is Nehemiah speaking, what evil thing is this that you do and profane the Sabbath? Verse 18, did not your fathers thus, and did not our Elohim bring this evil upon us and upon this city? Yet you bring more wrath upon Israel by profaning the Sabbath. Then in verse 9 is where it is here that Nehemiah is making a declaration due to the profaning of the Sabbath. Look at it. Nehemiah 13, 15 and 16, he was telling. He says, by buying on the Sabbath day. Nehemiah 13, 19, and it came to pass that when the gates of Jerusalem began to be dark. Now, this is where people that believe that the Sabbath begins on the evening in the dusk, this is where they hold fast to. However, this in Nehemiah chapter 13, verse 19 is not the same word for dark. The word that begins the beginning of the evening is areb, which is 6153, which means the dusk, as soon as it starts to get dark. This is not what word is being used here. It is the H6751, which means sa'al. This is the word that's translated sa'al, which means to shade as in cover. Now, this word is only used twice in Scripture. It was also used in Ezekiel 31:3, and better translated, became dark. So here's where he's saying, this is exactly what he's saying. And it came to pass that when the gates of Jerusalem began to be dark, meaning it was already dark. It was not the beginning of the evening. So he didn't do it at, let's just use this hypothetical, that sunset went down at 6:30 p.m. He didn't do it at Areb. He didn't do it at sunset. He said he did so later on. This was sometime during the night. He said it began to be dark. And it came to pass that when the gates of Jerusalem began to be dark before the Sabbath, I, Nehemiah, commanded that the gates should be shut and charged that they should not be opened till after the Sabbath. And some of my servants said at the gates that there should be no burden brought in on the Sabbath day. Here's where Nehemiah commanded to close the doors of the gate. This was all a new process, as the gate was just completed and dedicated in Nehemiah chapter 12, verses 27 to 43. He said, close the doors at night, not Areb, not at dusk, but Sa'al, at some time during the night, so that no one can get in and set up to sell on the Sabbath. That is the purpose of Nehemiah saying, close the doors at night. They're setting up, they're coming in, bringing in wares on the Sabbath, and so that they don't try to get over, we're going to close the doors of the gates at night. But it was not at Areb, which is at the dusk of the evening. It was at some point during the night. So you cannot use this as a proof text to say that the Sabbath begins in the evening. But I'll continue. Nehemiah 13:21, and then I testified against them and said unto them, Why lodge you about the wall? If you do so again, I'm going to lay hands on you. And from that time forth came they no more on the Sabbath. So the goal was achieved. Shut up the gate at night and do not open it until the Sabbath day is over. Now let's look at some of the characteristics of the Sabbath day, because we'll look at other days and see how it compares to the actual seventh day Sabbath. So the seventh day Sabbath is a day of rest. That's Leviticus chapter 23, verse 3. Morning and evening, approximately 12 hours each. You go back to Genesis 1:5. It is the day that establishes the first part. The evening, it was day and then evening, and the evening and the morning, the boker, right before the next day, right before the sunshine, was the first day. That's Genesis 1:5. Also in Exodus 16:12 through 25. It occurs on the seventh day of the work week. Now I'm specifying that because we'll see in subsequent chapters why that's important. It occurs on the seventh day of the work week. That's Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 to 3, and Exodus 20:10. It occurs after 6 days of work, the fourth commandment, Exodus 20, verse 8 through 11. Leviticus chapter 23:3. Now you shall rest on that day. Genesis chapter 2, verses 2 and 3. Exodus chapter 20:10. There's no cooking on that day. Seventh day Sabbath, no cooking. Exodus 16:23. Set apart convocations, where to have gatherings. And gatherings, the set apart congregation is the word micra, which means a gathering, a public gathering. And there's no transactions. That's what they were doing in Nehemiah chapter 13, verses 15 and 17. And also, we'll look at it later, Amos chapter 8, verses 5 through 7. So we looked at the seventh day Sabbath to establish what that is and when it takes place. Genesis chapter 1:5, we are taking that to say that the evening and the morning were the first day, but we see that that is an impossibility. The order that was given clearly in Genesis 1:5 is there is a day, there is the evening and the morning, the beginning right before the next day, is a 24-hour period, and that is the first day. Now we're going to look at Passover also. Now this one begins in the evening, and we're going to also explain exactly what's going on in Passover. Leviticus chapter 23:2. Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them concerning the feast of Yahuwah, which you shall proclaim to be a set-apart convocation. As we said, the word convocation is micro, means something called out or a public gathering. Even these are my feasts. These are the feast of Yahuwah, even set-apart convocations. Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 16. 3 times in a year shall all males appear before Yahuwah, the Elohim, in the place which he shall choose. The 3 feast times that we are to appear is in the Feast of Unleavened Bread, second, first fruit, and Feast of Weeks. And then the third is Sukkot, also known as the Feast of Tabernacle or the Feast of Booths. And they shall not appear before Yahuwah empty. That's Exodus chapter 23, 14 to 17, and 2 Chronicles 8:13. Now these are holy convocations as described in Leviticus chapter 23, verses 3 through 44. Now the seventh day Sabbath of rest, the Passover, first fruit offerings, Yom Teruah, and Yom Kippur are the convocations. They are our gatherings. Those are our micros. The 3 feast days, as we said, are the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Weeks, and the Feast of Tabernacles. But these are the most commonly known. There are others, but we'll discuss these and we'll briefly discuss some of the others. Now, all of which of these are Sabbaths, but only one of which is the seventh day of rest Sabbath. So as I said, we have the seventh day of rest Sabbath. We have the Passover, which is what we're looking at now. We have the Feast of Unleavened Bread. We have the first fruit offerings. That's in conjunction with the Feast of Weeks. Then from the Feast of Weeks, we have Yom Teruah. Then we have Yom Kippur. And then we have the Feast of Tabernacles. So he makes it very clear. If he's saying the start is in the evening, it is to specify that it is not the normal occasion during the day. Let's say it again. There's a specification between morning, a day that which takes place in the evening, when referring to any of the feast days or convocations. Now, in the 14th day of the first month at evening is Yahuwah's Passover. This is the Passah, which means the Passover or skip. He said, in the 14th month at evening is Yahuwah's Passover, is not a seventh-day Sabbath of rest. Did you hear me? The Passover is not the seventh-day Sabbath of rest. The seventh-day Sabbath of rest was already given to us. Now he's given the specification for the Passover, the 14th day of the first month at evening. Now on this particular Sabbath, it begins in the evening as specified. And I repeat, this is not the seventh-day Sabbath, and we will see several distinguishing characteristics of this Sabbath. Leviticus chapter 23, verse 6 reads, "And on the 15th day of the same month is the feast of unleavened bread unto Yahuwah." Now this is a new day. The 14th day at evening, the 15th day is the feast of unleavened bread. Well, okay, so you got Passover and then in the evening, and then in the morning of the 15th day, it just told us, let's read it again. "And on the 15th day of the same month is the feast of unleavened bread unto Yahuwah." This is a new day. And it happens in the morning, and we're going to prove that. This is after the Passover. Now, the Passover begins on the 14th day at evening. This is also in Exodus 12:6, and must be concluded before the morning. This is Exodus 12:10 and Deuteronomy 16:4, which is the 15th day. 14th and 15th. Those are two separate days. That's why I was explaining that the Sabbath is one day. Here we see the Passover is to begin on the 14th and must conclude before the 15th day, because the 15th day begins the feast of unleavened bread. As we continue in Deuteronomy 16:7, "And thou shalt roast and eat it in the place where Yahuwah thy Elohim shall choose. And thou shalt turn in the morning." When do you turn in? In the morning. What word is for morning? 1242. That is before the morning of the next day. We are to eat it in the evening, and then we go into our tents. This Sabbath or this Shabbat is a 12-hour period. Did you hear me? It is from Areb, which is 6153. This is the dusk, until Boker, 1242, which is the dawn or break of the day, early morning. It is from the 14th at evening, which is what Scripture tells us, and it has to be concluded before the morning of the 15th. It's Boker, which means right before the new morning. At the dawn, it has to be completed. We're going to keep going. Exodus 12:8. "And they shall eat the flesh in that night." What night? Is that a Reb, which means in the beginning of the evening? No. It is 3915, which is Layil, which means nighttime, and it differs from a Reb, which means dusk, or when it begins to be dark. He says, "And they shall eat that flesh in that night." At some point during that night, they begin to kill it at evening, and then we eat it. "And they shall eat the flesh in that night." What night? The night of the 14th. The night of the 14th day of the first month, designated as the Passover meal. "And they shall eat the flesh in that night, roast with fire, and," this is big now, "unleavened bread. And with bitter herbs they shall eat it." This is Exodus 12:8. Now, if you are reading Leviticus chapter 23, which gives the instructions on the Sabbath, and you don't compare Exodus account, and you don't compare the account of Deuteronomy, you are not going to have a clear understanding of what the Sabbaths are. In conjunction with Genesis chapter 1, you will not understand. Because one text is saying one thing, another text is saying another thing, and then the third text is saying something different. But if you don't understand what they're saying in conjunction to one another, you're going to be very confused. But as we continue, Exodus 12:10, "And you shall let nothing of it remain until morning." What is morning? That is 1242 Boker, which means the dawn. So we're to eat the Passover meal, the 14th, and we can't let any of it remain until morning, okay? "That which remaineth until morning you shall burn with fire." So Passover begins on the 14th day of the first month at evening, Exodus 12:6, and Leviticus 23:5, Deuteronomy 16:4. Do you see how I'm using Scripture? This is not what I'm saying. I am reading scripture. Exodus 12:8, Leviticus 23:5, and Deuteronomy 16:4. And it concludes before the morning of the 15th. That word is bokor, the dawn of the break of the day. Leviticus 23:6. And the 15th day of the same month is the feast of unleavened bread unto Yahuwah. 7 days must you eat unleavened bread. So when does the 15th day begin? It begins the morning of the 15th day. And Passover begins on the 14th, specifically at evening. And it must conclude before the 15th morning. Are we clear? In this category of Sabbath, it differs from the seventh day Sabbath as it begins in the evening. And this is watch this, a 12-hour Sabbath. This is a 12-hour Sabbath. The only one, Passover, is from evening to morning. The other 12-hour Sabbath, the seventh day Sabbath, is from morning to evening. Exodus 16:23. And he said unto them, this is that which Yahuwah hath said, tomorrow, the day before the seventh day Sabbath, is the rest or set apart Sabbath unto Yahuwah. Bake what you will bake today, and sieve that which you will sieve today, so no cooking is permitted on the seventh day Sabbath. You do that at night. You do all of your cooking. Read it again, Exodus 16:23. All of your cooking is done that night. He said, sieve what you will today. No cooking is permitted. Not only is the Passah or the Passover Sabbath to begin in the evening, it lasts only 12 hours, Exodus 12:10, Deuteronomy 16:7. You are permitted to cook on the Passover Sabbath. Exodus 12:8 and 9, Exodus 16:23. This Sabbath also differs from other Sabbath as the precise menu has been given. Exodus 12:8. And you shall eat the flesh, male lamb or goat 1 year old, in that night. Roast with fire and unleavened bread with bitter herbs and spices. It even tells us how to cook it. Exodus 12:9. Eat not of it raw, nor sodden it all with water. Don't boil it, but roast it with fire. His head with his legs and the pertinence. That's the bowels of the center part thereof. So he's telling us precisely on how to eat it. Deuteronomy 16:7. Now here the location of where it takes place after the first Passover, it changed and no longer in Egypt. Deuteronomy 16:6. And thou shalt roast and eat it in the place which Yahuwah thy Elohim shall choose. You see? And thou shalt turn in, again, in the morning. You do the Passover the 14th in the evening, and you go into the house before it's morning. And you go into your tent. The original command was given in Exodus 12:7. And they shall take of the blood and strike it on the two side posts and on the upper doorposts of the house wherein they shall eat it. Instructions are clear on even how you should eat this Passover or Sabbath meal. Listen, Exodus 12:11. And thus you shall eat it with your loins girded, your shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It is Yahuwah's Passover. Exodus 12:10. Ye shall let nothing of it remain until the morning, the dawn, the twilight, right before the sun shines, you have to get rid of it. That means it's from evening to morning. That is a 12-hour Sabbath from evening to morning. Leviticus 23:5. Passover is the 14th day of the month at evening. That's a Reb, 6153, until prior to the morning, H1242, Boker. So Passover is approximately 12 hours, evening to morning. Leviticus 23:6. And on the 15th day of the same month begins the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It concludes right before the 15th day. Passover concludes. On the 15th day, we begin the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Now let's just review. Passover meal Sabbath. It's approximately 12 hours. It takes place on the first month, on the 14th day of the evening. You can see Exodus 12:6 and Leviticus 23:5. Unleavened bread must be removed from the house during the day of the 14th day. You see that on Exodus 12:15. Unleavened bread is to be eaten with the meal. Exodus 12:8. Specific instructions on how to select the entree. Exodus 12, verses 3 through 5. Specific pre-meal instructions. Exodus 12:7. Specific instructions on when to eat, Exodus 12:8. Specific menu, Exodus 12:8. Specific cooking instructions, Exodus 12:8 and 9. Specific way that it must be eaten, Exodus 12:11. Specific purpose for the Passover, Exodus 12:12 and 13. Specific instructions that this is forever, Exodus 12:14. Specific instructions on when it concludes, Exodus 12:10 and Deuteronomy 16:4. It is from evening to morning. The next day is the Feast of Unleavened Bread, Leviticus chapter 23, verses 5 and 6. Now what I would like to look at is the third Sabbath, which is the Sabbath of unleavened bread. We will see later that the Feast of Unleavened Bread and the Feast of Tabernacle in several ways stands in a parallel position to one another. So when we get to the Feast of Tabernacle, you'll see some similarities. In Exodus 12, chapter 12, verse 15, 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, even the first day. You shall put away leaven out of your houses. Exodus 12:18. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread. And therefore the leaven has to be removed during the day hours of the 14th day in preparation for the Passover meal on the 14th day at evening. Let me say that again. Go to Exodus chapter 12, verse 18. In the first month, got it, okay, on the 14th day of the month, right, at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread. Oh, so we begin not eating unleavened bread on the 14th, even though the Feast of Unleavened Bread doesn't begin until the 15th morning. You got it. Okay, very good. Yes. Exodus 12:19. 7 days there shall be no leaven found in your houses. So that is the 14th through the 20th. No leavened bread found in your houses. So from the 14th day, during the day, and in the evening, all the way up to the 20th day, there shall be no leaven found in your houses. For whatsoever, this is Exodus 12:19, for whosoever eateth that which is leavened, even that soul shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel. Now, however, the 14th day until the 21st day is a total of 8 days. Wait a minute. Let's do a count. The 14th, 1 day. 15th, 2 days. 16th, 3 days. 17th, 4 days. 18th, 5 days. 19th, 6 days. 20th, 7. 21st, that's 8 days. Exodus 12:18b. You shall eat unleavened bread until the 1 and 20th of the month at evening. Leavened bread is not allowed approximately 7.5 days. So it's the first day all the way to the 8th day, the 7.5 days, because at evening we are allowed to eat it. We'll see. We'll keep going. We're going to keep going. Exodus 12:15. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. Even the first day you shall put leaven out of your houses. For whosoever eateth leavened bread from the first day, that's the 14th day, until the 7th day, that's the 20th day. Well, hold on. This is what I was telling you. The first day, we don't eat unleavened bread. We eat unleavened bread on the 14th at evening, but it tells us right here in Exodus 12:15, on the 21st day, you can have leaven at evening. Therefore, from the 14th to the 20th is no leaven, and it's a total of 7 days. The 21st is not considered a complete day, because you can have leavened bread in the evening. That's Exodus 12:18. Exodus 12:16. In the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Exodus 12:16. In the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Not referring to Passover. That's the 15th day. And again, it's not referring to Passover on the 14th. There shall be a holy convocation. This is on the 15th, the first day, which is the 15th. This is a type of Sabbath. And on the 7th day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, that's the 15th to the 21st, there shall be a holy convocation to you. Again, another Sabbath. No manner of work shall be done in it except that which you must eat. That only may be done. Oh, so you can cook on these Sabbaths? Yeah. So you could cook on the Passover Sabbath? Yeah. How about on the 15th when that's a Sabbath? Yeah. How about on the 21st when that's a Sabbath? Yeah. Well, how long is the Sabbath? Well, it ends at evening on the 21st. But I thought it started evening. No, it ends at evening. Here it begins in the morning of the 15th. It has to conclude. Passover is from the 14th at evening until it has to be, everything has to be eaten and or burned before the 15th. On the 15th of the feast, 15th day is the Feast of Unleavened Bread. That goes for 7 days. That goes until the 21st. And on the 21st day, you can eat bread in the evening. Okay, I get it. Exodus 12:16 again. And the first day, that's the Feast of Unleavened Bread. That's when you begin the Feast of Unleavened Bread. That Leviticus chapter 23, verse 7. In the first day you shall have a set apart convocation. This is referring to the Feast of Unleavened Bread. This is a public gathering. Okay, what else? This distinguishes the Passover meal from the Feast of Unleavened Bread, from the seventh day Sabbath. On all Sabbaths, there is no work to be done, but provisions are given for specific Sabbaths. The first day, the 15th of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, is the 12-hour Sabbath, but we can cook on the Sabbath. And the 21st day is the 12-hour Sabbath. We can also cook on this day. Exodus 12:18b, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st of the month at evening. That's the 21st day at evening. Then we can resume our normal consumption of bread. Leviticus chapter 23:6. 7 days you must eat unleavened bread. Also in Exodus 12:16. Leviticus chapter 23:7. You shall do no servile work therein. A Sabbath, but not the seventh day Sabbath, but instead a 7-day period, including 2 Sabbaths. What else? What do we do? Oh, okay. Leviticus 23:8. But you shall offer an offering made by fire unto Yahuwah 7 days. 7 days, Feast of Unleavened Bread. Got it. From the 15th day to the 21st day. Now, currently, we don't have a temple. We don't know who the priests are. You can see the rules for who was to offer in Leviticus 1:5, chapter 3, verse 2, and also Leviticus 8:14. Now, taking on the mindset of the patriarchs, for a personal note, I cook on the grill. Leviticus chapter 23:8. Continue. And the 7th day is a set-apart convocation. This is when we have a public gathering. You shall do no servile work then. This is another Sabbath. Similar to the 7th day Sabbath, but not quite. These 2 days, you are allowed to cook. This is the first, and then on the 7th. This is referring to the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Exodus 12:16d. No manner of work should be done save that which every man must eat. That only may be done of you. So you're not to work, but you can cook. You can do the things of a festival. Exodus 12, verse 18. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening. Again, unleavened bread, the eating of unleavened bread begins on the 14th through the 21st, concludes in the 21st. But the Feast of Unleavened Bread begins on the 15th and concludes on the 21st. So the 21st day after sundown, you are free to eat leavened bread. This is a total of 8 days from the 14th, again, through the 21st, with the first being on the Passover meal, the 14th at evening. Then the actual day of unleavened bread begins the morning of the 15th. Leviticus chapter 23, verse 5, evening is specified. However, in verse 6, it is a new day, which is the 15th. And it begins unleavened bread, no eating of it for 6 more days. So let's look at it. From the 15th, this is unleavened bread. We're not referring to the Passover. Here the text is referring to unleavened bread. This is for 6 days. He said no eating of it for 6 more days. On the 15th, that's the first day. 16th, second day. 17th, third day. 18th, fourth. 19th, fifth. 20th is the 6th day, but is completed on the 21st at evening, the 7th day of the feast, so you are allowed to eat unleavened bread in the evening. Therefore, the 21st is not a complete day, but concludes on the 21st day. I hope you understand me. If it had been concluded not in the evening, but throughout the evening, it will be considered completed on the 22nd day. So it's an 8-day period, as we just said, from the 14th through the 21st. 14th is Passover. 15th begins the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So Deuteronomy 16:3 says, thou shalt eat no leavened bread with it. This is referring to the Passover meals. 7 days thou shalt eat unleavened bread. Simply put, this will be from the 14th to the 20th. So Deuteronomy 16:8 says 6 days thou shalt eat unleavened bread. But the 7th day is mentioned in Leviticus 23:6 and in Exodus 12:15, and finally in Deuteronomy 16:3. As I said, it can get confusing if you are not utilizing all of the text and rely on the one text. So is it 6 days? Is it 7 days? And now I'm hearing 8 days. I don't know what's going on. So let's figure it out. Deuteronomy 16:8, once again, 6 days thou shalt eat unleavened bread. Now this is specifically referring to the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which begins on the 15th, and not the Passover, which begins on the 14th. We do not eat it on the day and evening of the 15th, the day and evening of the 16th, the day and evening of the 17th, the day and evening of the 18th, the day and evening of the 19th, the day and evening of the 20th. This gives us Deuteronomy 16:8. 6 days thou shalt not eat unleavened bread. But at the evening we are able to eat unleavened bread. So excluding the Passover, beginning with the start of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, it is 6 days. No leavened bread. Including the Passover, it is 7 days. And the actual dates are from 14th to the 21st, which are 8 days. Do you hear me now? Did you understand that? Deuteronomy 16:8 says 6 days. The Passover, beginning with the start of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, it is 6 days. No leavened bread, and including the Passover, it is 7 days. The actual dates from the 14th to the 21st is 8 days, as explained. Thou shalt do no work therein. The 21st day of the month is a Sabbath until the evening. Proof text, Exodus 12:18. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening. That's the 21st, 14th to the 21st, Exodus 12:18. If you fuse this interpretation, then you must then create a Passover that lasts from the 14th at evening, continues for 24 hours until the 15th at evening, which is not what the text said, then add another 12 hours because Exodus 12:10 states that it must be completed before the morning, which would make it a 36-hour Passover, and would disregard that the instructions are on the 15th day begins the Feast of Unleavened Bread Festival. Just let that sink in for a second. Leviticus chapter 23, verse 7. In the first day, this is the 15th, Leviticus 23:6, you shall do no servile work therein. The first day of unleavened bread is a Sabbath, and the 7th day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread is a Sabbath. That will be the 21st. So, and you can see that in Exodus 12:15 and Leviticus 23:6-8. See, I'm giving you all the scripture because these are the proof texts. I'm not making this up. I'm just reading. Leviticus chapter 23:7. So far, we have identified a 7th-day Sabbath and a few set-day Sabbaths, including unleavened bread on the 15th of the month, the first month, and then 7 days later, which is Exodus 12:15, Leviticus 23:6-8, and a 12-hour Passover on the 14th day of the month at evening, Exodus 12:6 and Leviticus 23:5, until morning, Exodus chapter 2, verses 8-10. So, the Feast of Unleavened Bread Sabbaths. Work is not permitted on the first day or the 7th day. It lasts for 7 days, Exodus 12:15 and Leviticus 23:6. It has 2 Sabbaths. On the first day is the 15th, and the 7th day is the 21st. You see that in Exodus chapter 12:16 and Leviticus chapter 23, verse 7 and 8. It has two convocations. This is public gatherings. That's Exodus 12:16 and Leviticus 23:7. Beginning in morning and ending in the evening. Leviticus chapter 23, verse 6, day, not evening. Exodus 12:10, morning is the 15th. Cooking is permitted. So we know this is not the seventh-day Sabbath. Exodus 12:16. An offering made by fire 7 days. This is Leviticus chapter 23, verse 8. So in subsequent scriptures, we're going to look at the rest of the feast days. We're going to look at the first fruit, the Feast of Weeks. We're going to look at Yom Teruah. We're going to look at Yom Kippur. We're going to look at the Feast of Booths, or the Feast of Tabernacles. We're going to look at the new moon. We're going to figure out if the new moon is actually a Sabbath. Are the days of the moon Sabbaths and feast days? Are new moon days Sabbaths? Which cycle determines the new moon? Is it the sliver or the full moon? And what date is the Sabbath? All of these things we're going to look at by utilizing scripture. I thank you for listening, and I pray that this was a blessing to someone. As always, if you have any questions, you can email me at newgenesis5111@gmail.com. If you would like a complete version of this lecture, you can let me know. I'll send it in its entirety. It'll be in written form. You can email me at newgenesis5111@gmail.com.